Well, good morning, and welcome to our service webinar for the month. It's wonderful to see all of you in the chat today, and we are grateful you're here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Anthony, and I am a trainer with CERVIS Technologies. I have a couple notes before we jump into our subject for today. First of all, if you have any questions throughout the call, please feel free to ask away using the questions tab, which you should see near the hand raising icon at the bottom or side of your screen. I have several colleagues on the call who will be answering questions directly, but if there are any questions that are relevant for the entire group, they'll also pass those along for a Q&A session towards the end of the call. Second, for those who don't know, we have a YouTube channel with all of our previously recorded webinars and short form tutorials. You can get access to this channel by going to video.servicetech.com, or if you just go to YouTube and search for CERVIS Technologies. This recording will be joining those previously recorded webinars as soon as that's done, but this is a great place to find good resources on different various topics. So I'll be kind of referencing this a couple times today as there's a couple videos that I want to point you towards in case you haven't seen those. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. So our plan for today is to provide a high-level overview of the service platform. This is intended both for new administrators as well as existing users who would simply like a general refresher of services capabilities and best practices. We'll start our time today by engaging the platform from the volunteer perspective, which is kind of what we're looking at right now. We're going to discuss the typical volunteer onboarding process as well as a few common alternatives. After this, we'll take a look at the main admin dashboard, the different parts of the database. We'll talk about creating opportunities and the different types of opportunities available, as well as how to manage them once they're created. Then we'll look at some other opportunity-related features like the newly added stickers, impact tracking, and the sign-in console. And then we'll take a look at the volunteer management portion of the database, including running searches, messaging or emailing through service, and some common managerial tasks like reporting. After that, we'll quickly cover working with groups through service. And then finally, we'll take a look at what resources are available to you as you are engaging the platform. So a lot of subjects today. We're not going to go into all of those in great detail. We do have webinars covering a lot of those subjects if you want more specific information on those, kind of drilling into them. But the goal for today is to provide kind of a general overview. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, to start off, we're going to take a look at the system from the volunteer perspective. Now, we did do a webinar on this recently titled Streamlining the Volunteer Registration Process. And if you haven't viewed that, that's a good resource to kind of give you an understanding of what is sort of the best practice and what maybe should you consider as you're directing volunteers to sign up for your events. But what we're looking at right now is sort of an example of what you might choose to do and how you might direct your volunteers. Now, typically, when a volunteer is engaging with you, they might start off with something like this page. This is called your event listing and registration page, or sometimes referred to as the opportunity registration page. This is where your opportunities get posted. So when a volunteer is interested in something, they can view what you've got available. They can click to learn more about that particular opportunity. And if they decide they want to register, they click to sign up as a volunteer. Now, this process can be varied, and we'll talk about some of that. You can have a restriction process in place, so volunteers don't meet the requirements for a certain event. You can change that up a little bit. You can also create sort of like an application process if you want to have an approval process in place. So it just kind of depends on how you need to onboard volunteers. Like I mentioned, that webinar that we did on streamlining your volunteer registrations is a good resource for that sort of subject. But sort of the standard workflow, again, might be a volunteer starts off on a home page where maybe they're selecting, what program they're interested in. Once they've done that, they can view the events within that program. They can maybe make some of their own decisions in terms of filtering this page or searching for certain events by location or things like that. But once they find what they want to register for, they can click to learn more about it and then click to register. And when a volunteer goes through that step, it'll take them to an account check page. Now, it remembers me because I was logged in previously, so it will remember volunteers. But if they're a new volunteer, they'll be brought to this account check page. They'll type in their information here, If the system recognizes them, again, it's just going to ask for a password. If they don't know it, they can reset it on that next page. If the system does not recognize them, so if I put in my wife's name here and we press enter, that'll take us to create a new profile. So the system is asking us to create a new account as a part of the registration process. And once a volunteer fills all of this out, they'll click on Create Volunteer Profile, and from there they'll complete their registration as long as they met the requirements for that event. So if we back up a step here and we just log into my existing account, from there, the system, after I click on Register here, this is a time slot event. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. But once a volunteer clicks on register, they'll get a confirmation message on this screen. They'll also get a confirmation email right away with all the details about that particular event. If they need to cancel, they can do that from there. But generally at this point, a volunteer is done with their engagement. There are other things that a volunteer could do. For example, I might choose to sign up one of my kids for this particular event as well. So I could add a profile to the system and sign them up for that same shift. Or maybe I want to go and sign up for another event. I could do that as well. There's also a home page for volunteers, and they can manage their account through here. They can upload documents or view documents you've posted. They can also view what awards they've earned or print out their activity history. So there are a number of things that volunteers can do, but typically, like I said, after a volunteer signs up for an event, that was their goal, they're going to close out of the browser and move on. So that's kind of the standard volunteer engagement. Again, there are a number of ways to vary that process. It just depends on how you want to direct your volunteers and really what your application process looks like. Do you need to send volunteers to just create a profile initially, or do you want them to view events based on location or based on particular attributes about the event? So it just kind of depends on how you need to direct volunteers. And again, I'd encourage you to review that webinar on streamlining the volunteer registration process. If you have questions about this, there are a number of different ways to engage the volunteer. Okay, let's switch gears now to kind of the admin side of the system. So we're going to switch over to another tab here and log into the admin console. The page that we're looking at right now is the main administrative dashboard. So there's a few different things going on here I want to point out. First of all, we have 4 different headings. So we have the volunteer management, opportunity management, attribute management, and system management headings. Each of these obviously just controls a different part of the database. The majority of the time that you spend in service will be in these top 2 headings. This is where you'll go to create new accounts, search and manage your existing volunteers, send emails, run reports, submit background checks, create opportunities, manage registrations, open the sign-in console, right? All of the kind of stuff that you'd normally be doing when you think of managing volunteers. The bottom 2 headings, attribute and system management, are more like the back office side. You're not going to spend near as much time down here, apart from setup or maybe tweaking your console. For example, under system management, you have the system configuration. If you're not familiar with this and you are the admin in your system, you should take a look in here. This is where all of your global settings are. If we click into this menu, there's a bunch of different headings here. If you haven't gone through this, I'd encourage you to just glance through the sections, open it up, take a quick look. You don't need to read every single note, but if you find something that interests you, for example, you can change your sent from address for your emails that go out. You can read more about that. And in this case, you do need to contact the customer support if you want to make a change there, right? So if you find some settings that you have questions about or things that kind of pique your interest, we generally have articles on kind of all of these different settings. And of course, you can always contact our customer support team with questions as well. So again, if you haven't been in the system configuration, I'd encourage you to glance through it. There's a couple sections in particular that I want to point out to you. First of all, everything that you are collecting from volunteers, basically your volunteer application or the profile creation page, that's customizable. In Service, the minimum data that the system needs from volunteers is last name, first name, primary phone, and email. You won't see those 4 things listed in this information collection section. But everything beyond that is toggleable in here. So if you want to add more information to your application or remove information from your application, you can basically make those changes through here. This contains kind of all the general fields that you might want to utilize. It's pretty standard information like birth date or t-shirt size or things like that. But there is also below this section an option called Custom Volunteer Profile Fields, which enables you to set up custom questions that are maybe more unique to your organization. Now, again, what we're looking at is your general application. So whenever someone creates a profile, they're filling out all this information. There's a couple exceptions to that. You can use something called the Quick Reg application in Service, and that's essentially like a truncated version of your general application. You can modify that application in here. At the top of this information collection section, there's a button to configure your Quick Reg fields. And this essentially allows you to pick which questions are on the Quick Reg application. And then one other note, and we'll look at this more today as well, you can also set up what are called custom registration questions. These are questions that would be uniquely tied to particular opportunities. So perhaps you've posted a listing for an intern and you have some specific questions for intern applications, like what school are you attending, when are you graduating, how many hours do you need? Questions like that are maybe more unique to that specific role. You can use custom registration questions to capture that data. Again, we'll touch on this more later, but I wanted to point out this section because it's important you know that the data you're collecting from volunteers is really up to you. One other thing I wanted to point out in this area is that you can also modify or collect a signature from volunteers. And of course, what they're signing is up to you. You can modify that. But this is referred to as the terms and conditions. So when a volunteer creates a profile, they would check a box next to this intro text and then also type in their signature potentially. If you don't see a signature next to your field, that's just a setting. But when someone signs those terms, it gets stored in their profile as signed terms and conditions, and you can go and download that document later as needed. Okay, a couple more sections I want to point out in here. We're not going to go through all of this, but I also want to make sure you know that there's a section called page content and email message content, as well as your system appearance. These are ways to change the way that Service looks. So if you want to make it match your website a little bit better, or if you'd like to change the verbiage that the system uses at the tops of different pages or in things like a confirmation email, those are all things that you can edit. And generally, these are the sections to do so. As you're looking at a section like this, there is a preview icon in here if you'd like to view what that paragraph actually looks like in situ. You can use that here to kind of identify what page this is that we're talking about. Okay, so we've been in your system configuration or the idea of the system configuration. Again, if it's not something that you've taken a look at previously, I'd encourage you to scroll through that and just kind of glance through those sections. And of course, if you have any questions, always use that Need Help button. You can click on that. You can type in a topic through here. Let's say we just want to learn about the system configuration. You can search for that. We have articles in all the different sections. And of course, you can always click on Contact Us to submit a question to our customer support team as well. Okay, so again, this bottom side of the system is more like the back office side. You're not going to spend near as much time down here, with maybe the exception of groups. We're going to come back to groups a little bit later today, but that's also housed in this bottom section. A couple other things on the main dashboard I want to point out. There are these charts. You may have seen these previously. These are just intended to give you an idea of how you're doing. When are your general seasons? When are things busier, less busy? What are kind of your more kind of fruitful categories, or where do you have more volunteers? That kind of thing. Kind of gives you an idea of what's going on in your console. Generally, how many new volunteers do you have? How many hours and all that sort of stuff. You can interact with these. If you want to change what information you're looking at, maybe I only want to look at new volunteers, you can deselect things through here and click on that. You can also hide these charts if you don't want them taking up so much space. There's two more things I want to point out on this page. One is the search bar. This is kind of like a universal search bar. You can find really anything in the database through here. So if you're looking for a particular person, you can put their name in there and that'll show you volunteers with that name. It'll show you email addresses with that string. You'll see opportunities where there's a contact with that name. Same thing with groups, if there's a group with the contact with that name. So it really searches all the different parts of the database. So that's kind of helpful if you're not totally sure where something is. This also searches the system configuration. So, maybe we couldn't remember, where do I turn on tracking birth dates? You could search by that term and that'll tell you where that is. And if you click into it, that'll actually take you to that part of the system configuration. So that search bar is pretty useful. One more pretty cool thing you can do with this is actually create QR codes. So for example, let's say you wanted to share a QR code to a particular event, or maybe to like a filtered page on your website or something like that. You can grab the URL, and then if we paste that in here, it'll ask if we want to create a QR code using that. And of course, you can just click on that. And then once you've made the QR code, you can right click it and save it or copy it out and then put it into a flyer, things like that. This works with any URL. It doesn't have to be a service specific one, so it can be directing people to your website. Okay, last thing on the main dashboard I want to point out is this navigation bar at the top. And really this just replicates everything from the main dashboard. It's a helpful tool as you get used to the system or more comfortable with it. You don't always have to go back to the main dashboard. You can use this to jump between the different sections and go to specific pages. It's a pretty helpful tool. It also remembers different attributes. So for example, if you were working on a specific volunteer's profile, let's say we click into, manage someone's account. Then from there, if let's say now I need to go and manage a specific event, I could go in and work on that event. But then if I need to go back to that volunteer, it will remember who I was last working with. And then same thing on the opportunity side, it remembers the event that you were last working within. And then on the far right-hand side, there's also this profile icon. This tells you who's logged in, what access they have, how much time is remaining on your session. This is a setting in the system configuration. So if you want to extend or reduce that, you can. This timer also renews automatically when you're taking actions in the system. But if you are inactive for this amount of time, whatever yours is set to, it will log you out. Pretty standard functionality. One really important thing I want to point out in this section is that you can switch to view the system as a volunteer. So even if you're an administrator, you can view the system from the volunteer perspective if you would like to, and vice versa. If you've logged into the volunteer side and then you want to get over to the admin side, you can switch to view the admin access from here. And of course, that only applies based on what your access level is in the system. Okay, so that's kind of the main dashboard. Let's drill down into some more specific topics here. The first thing I want to dive into is opportunities. In CERVIS, opportunity is an umbrella term for any type of event or project where you're collecting applications or allowing registrations or having volunteers record activity. So let's go into adding a new opportunity. The first thing you'll see here is opportunity type, and there are 3 types of opportunities within CERVIS. We have what we call events and service projects. There are 2 event types. We have normal events and time slot events, but the hallmark of an event, either kind, is that you are creating shifts. A normal event is, you might also call like a special event. It's essentially a singular shift. So maybe you have something this Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon. You could set that up as a single normal event. You would specify your start time and end time here. And this is, again, basically what you're asking volunteers to attend. So that's kind of what we would refer to as an event. And specifically, a normal event has 1 shift. A time slot event is that same sort of idea, but expanded. You might have multiple different shifts that you want your volunteers to select between. So you can create multiple different time slots, and each of those time slots has their own date, start time and end time, number of volunteers needed, number of credit hours. You can add some notes to provide some more relevant information. But the idea is kind of the same. You're creating shifts and you're asking volunteers to sign up for what shift or shifts work best for them. There are different ways to create time slot events. You can go in and manually create a really large scale time slot event. or maybe you have like a festival happening on a particular day and you can just go and create each time slot by hand. There are some bulk update options in here. So if they're all occurring, let's say on the same date, you could go and do a bulk update and say they're all on the 29th. So there's some bulk update options in here as well. And there's also the ability to repeat time slots. So if you have something that occurs on a regular basis, maybe the same shift 5 days a week or 2 shifts 5 days a week, like a morning shift and an afternoon shift. What you would do in that type of scenario is initially just create your templates. So I'd make a morning shift and then I'd make an afternoon shift. And then you can tell the system to repeat those time slots. That repeat function is not something you'll see on this page. It's something you see after you've created the event initially. So you'd need to go in and fill out things like the name of the event, who the organizer is, the location, what interest category it's a part of. But once you've built out kind of the basics of the event, then you could go in and update that time slot event and repeat those shifts. So let me show you that real quick. So we're going to step away from this page. We're going to use the navigation bar at the top here and go into search and manage existing opportunities. And actually this Trails and Waterways event is what I want to go into, but we'll start off kind of on the base page here. So this event, Trails and Waterways, is a time slot event. I can tell that right away because of the icon on the left-hand side here. It says time slot and the color indicates that it's a time slot event. But also for those of you who are colorblind like myself, you can also just use this icon here that says manage time slots. This tells us it's a time slot event. And if I click into manage time slots, you'll see that each of these time slots has on the left-hand side a repeat function. And what this allows us to do is to repeat this shift. So if I had this same event occurring, let's say every 4th Monday for the fall season, what I could do is say this time slot is repeating, click on repeat time slot for that shift. So this is in particular the Basecamp support. If I click on repeat time slot, I can choose the day of the week to repeat it on. I can choose the frequency. So I said every 4th Monday. So what we would do here, instead of weekly, we would say the 4th occurrence of the month. We've already got Mondays selected, but you can also do weekly or bi-weekly, or obviously 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or last occurrence of the month. And then we can give it a start date. We already have one on the 23rd, so we'll jump to the 24th. And let's say this is going through the end of November. So we can go and select that as our end date. And if we click on create repeating schedule here, what it will do is copy that time slot on all the applicable days of the week in between, which in this case is just 2 more instances, right? So we have the 28th of October and the 25th of November, which are the 4th Mondays in each of those months. So you can use that repeat function to create kind of large scale or repeating time slot events. Now, a really common example of this might be something that you do on a daily basis. So if we back up here and look at another example that I have this sort and repack event, which is 5 days a week. And this is set up for an entire year. So I think it's something like 265 time slots. To make this event initially, all I did was make the first shift. And then I came in here and I told the system to repeat this shift on 5 days of the week on a weekly basis. And then I gave it a date range. So I did this for an entire calendar year. And I've obviously already built this out, but that was really easy to do. I didn't need to create 265 time slots. I just made one initially, and then I repeated it out for the date range. One other important aspect of time slot events specifically, and specifically things like this event that are occurring over a long period of time, I might not want people signing up into May of next year. That's pretty far out. So what you can do is for an event like this, for a time slot event, if we go into update this event, down towards the bottom of the page, there's a section called advanced options. And one of the options in here is to automatically hide open slots until a certain number of months prior. So I have mine set to 1 month prior. The default is show all, so people would be able to see, in this case, all the way out into May of next year, but I don't necessarily want that. So we'll have this set to 1 month prior. That means volunteers can see the current month plus 1 additional month. So if we actually look at this event from the volunteer perspective, I'm going to use this navigation bar up here. It's going to log me out, and then we'll go to the event listing page. And we can see for that sort and repack event here, this is set up again to show 1 month prior. Right now we're at the end of June. So we see the remainder of June and then we see all of July. So if we scroll down, we'll see through the end of July here. We will start seeing the August shifts as soon as we hit July 1st. All right, so that's kind of the idea of a time slot event. There are a number of ways to use those, but again, the idea is that you have a bunch of shifts and you want volunteers to select between those available shifts. The third type of opportunity in service is called a service project. Service projects are more like long-form opportunities where volunteers can select volunteers rather can record activity as they serve. Now, how a volunteer records activity into this project is a setting. We'll talk about this more in a moment. But this kind of idea typically encapsulates something like an intern or an office aide, someone who's working with you really consistently. So instead of having them sign up for a bunch of different shifts, you just want them to record their activity, or maybe you want to build out a schedule for them. This can also work really well with things where volunteers are just operating independently. Maybe you have a mentorship program or a coaching program where you're not telling the person when to do their job. You just want them to record that activity as they serve. This service project essentially creates a container where those hours can be recorded. It's a little bit more free form in a sense. Instead of defining a shift, you define a date range. Now, if this is something like an internship or a coaching program that lasts for a particular season, you'd want those dates reflected in here. But if this is something like a mentorship program or some kind of office aid that's just kind of ongoing, there's no real time frame associated with this, you can tell the system to push the end date back as far as you want to. In that case, I would also, under the advanced options, tell the system not to display those dates. So there's a setting specifically for that for service projects, and then it'll just say that it's ongoing. The reason you'd want to push that end date back is because the system only allows hours to be recorded within this time frame here. So if you don't push the end date back, this is going to wind up getting closed out at some point. But the main attribute about a service project that kind of distinguishes it is the ability to log hours. So you can either log hours from the admin perspective on behalf of volunteers. So somebody told you they worked for 6 hours yesterday. You could always go in and log that activity on the admin side, no matter what you have selected here. But you can allow volunteers to record their own hours as well. There's 3 options. You have online, on-site, and both. Online means that a volunteer can log into their account and kind of retroactively record activity. So they could say, I was here today for 3.5 hours. This is what I did. Or I was here last Thursday for 2 hours, and this is what I did. They're basically recording their hours after the fact. On-site means that the volunteer has to record their hours as they serve them. So you're asking the volunteer to use the sign-in console or mobile sign-in. So basically when they arrive, they sign in. When they leave, they sign out, and that would record exactly how long they were there. So that's used in conjunction with the sign-in console in one form or fashion. Again, no matter what you select through here, you as an admin can always modify those hours. You can always make adjustments. And of course, you can record hours on behalf of a volunteer as well. That's kind of the idea of a service project. Again, they're more of like a long form activity. A couple of really important things to point out when you're creating any of the opportunity types. Of course, you have a name for your opportunity. That's pretty straightforward. You have your organizer, the point of contact. You have your location, but I want to point out here the interest category. This is a way for you to categorize your events. So I typically tend to think of these like folders. So when I'm creating an event in my system, I define what program it's a part of, and I also define what location it's at. This might not be relevant to you to have both of those pieces of information, but what I would encourage you to have here is really what makes sense in terms of reporting. How do you need to distinguish your events? Is it by program? Is it by region or location? Or is it by some other kind of attribute? So this is a pretty important reporting subject. Below that, there's one other setting that's very important, and that's this publish online option. This is how you tell the system whether or not to push this event to your volunteers. The default here is no. Any of the yes options means that the event will be published to volunteers, but only yes open allows volunteers to see and sign up for this on their own. So that's what you might typically use if you want this to show up on your event listing page. And we looked at that at the very beginning today. Now, there are valid reasons to not publish an event. Specifically, maybe you have a private event for a certain group, or maybe you have an event that you only want to invite certain people who are approved to sign up. That's a pretty valid reason to not publish your event. And in that case, you might use a private invite link to bring people in, or just sign them up on the back end. That's obviously a very valid option as well. One other thing to point out about this publish online option, you might have noticed there's a coming soon option, and of course you can manually control that. But you do have the ability also to publish your event and then tell the system to withhold it until a certain scheduled posting date. So if we scroll down under advanced options, there is a setting here that says scheduled posting date. By default, this is this morning, so it'll go live right away. But we can also change this. Maybe I've told my volunteers, hey, this event or the new events are going live on July 1st at noon. I could go and set that as my scheduled posting date, and I would still want that publish online setting to be yes open. But now the system is going to withhold the event or any events I have set up like this until this date and time passes, and then it'll publish the event. Okay, there's a couple other settings and attributes about events that I want to make sure we point out. One of those is tags, and associated with tags is stickers. So we're going to back up here and look at the event listing page again, just how volunteers can see and engage with your opportunities. You'll notice on my events here, I have little icons, these stickers, that indicate just different information. What these stickers indicate is entirely up to you. These are built on the back of tags. So I have tagged a number of my events with this wheelchair accessible tag, and then I've added a sticker to it so that it displays on the event itself. I have other tags here for, this event has heavy lifting, or this event requires a background check, or this is a water event, or this one's good for groups. There's a number of different things that you can do with these stickers, but they're built on the back of tags. So essentially, I have tagged a number of my events with these different attributes here, and then I've chosen to create stickers that indicate that information as well. There are a lot of different ways to use these. We do have a webinar on stickers specifically, if you're interested in kind of diving into that a little bit more deeply. But typically, I've found that it's pretty helpful to have things like attributes about your events, maybe things that volunteers might be interested in or need to be able to filter by. But they're also great for just kind of displaying information about the event. Like maybe you want to display that this is an outdoor event versus an indoor event. You can have that kind of information conveyed as well. And it's just a nice way to visually engage your volunteers. Now, stickers, just in brief, are created, again, after you've created tags. So in my system, I have tags on my events. You can generate those when you initially create the event. If we go into update the event here, or when you're initially setting up an event, under advanced options, you'll see a tag section. You can write those in through here. Now I can go in and add tags or manage the tag cloud through here as well. But once a tag is on the event, then you can add a sticker to the tag. Where the stickers are added is through the tag cloud. There's a whole bunch of ways to get to the tag cloud. This page is one of them. I kind of briefly showed that, this tag cloud icon, but we could also get there from the main opportunity management dashboard. Up at the top, there's this view tag cloud option. And you'll also see this in a bunch of other places as well. But you can see for opportunity tags, we have a sticker icon next to each tag. And if we go in here, we can click on apply tag sticker. We can give it a name, a display name. So in my case, I might make this actually just the same as the tag itself, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And then you choose what icon you want to use. So it's entirely up to you. There's a lot of options in here. You can just go through and kind of pick what you'd like to add. And then you can choose if you want this to be publicly displayed, admin only, or also searchable. Typically, I make these searchable if it's something that volunteers might be interested in searching by. That just means that volunteers can click on it and find events, with that same tag. So that's pretty much it in terms of adding a sticker. Again, if you'd like to have more information about this, we do have a webinar on that subject specifically. Okay, so that's stickers. Couple other things I wanted to point out. We briefly mentioned earlier the idea of custom registration questions. So if your event requires some extra information from volunteers who are signing up, maybe you need to know for this cleanup event if people have their own equipment that they could bring, or if they've already attended a certain orientation or training, or you just want to ask if they can speak a certain language or whatever, whatever questions that might relate specifically to this particular event, you can use those custom registration questions to do that. So if we click into this menu, this is again basically just a way to add questions to the registration for this particular event. Now this inventory of questions is up to you. You get to decide what these questions are and how they're phrased. If you go into this menu and you don't see any questions here, in the bottom right, you can manage your registration question inventory, and this is where you create new custom registration questions. I used the example earlier of accepting applications for something like an internship where you might need some more information like references that you don't normally need volunteers to give you. This is a kind of a good use of custom registration questions just to expand, the application process for particular events. But these questions can also be prohibitive. So I mentioned the idea earlier of, did you review this training material or did you watch this training video? You could have a yes or no question. So you'd make a selection box here, make it required, and just ask, did you review the training video? And you can make it a yes or no question by writing in those options in here. And then you can set a required answer. So you could make it so that volunteers can only register for this event if they select yes. And then the failure message I would probably customize this to say, in order to sign up for this event, you have to go and review the training video found here, and direct people to where that is. So these custom registration questions are pretty malleable. Just think of them as a way to expand on your general application when people are signing up for specific opportunities. Okay, a couple more things within events. Just while we're on this screen, the default view for this opportunity management page is your open opportunities, so things that are ongoing or upcoming. You can, of course, search for events by name or keyword or tag. You can also search specifically for closed opportunities. There is an advanced search as well to find very specific sets of events. So there's a lot of options in here in terms of searching. But the default view is open events. There is a calendar view version of this page as well. If you'd prefer to look at a calendar here, you can interact with the events on this calendar. So if you click on a particular shift, you can actually engage with that. You could manage it or do a quick registration in there, export this to your own calendar, edit the event, things like that. So you can interact with the shifts through here as well. And then there is also a way to create a printable version of this calendar. So like a monthly printable version of that. And if you want to, you can also include registrations on this page. Now, obviously right now we're looking at all of my events, and that makes this a pretty monstrous page. But something interesting and helpful that you can do is if you run a search. So let's say I only want to view my sort and repack event. I could search for that event by name. And now if we open up that calendar view, it's only showing me those shifts. So now if I include registration, that's not so unwieldy. So if I wanted to create a printout like this and just have those names laid out, that is an option. Okay, a couple more things on this page. There are some bulk actions that you can take. So as I'm looking at my events here, I could select multiple events or even all the events that I searched for. Or in this case, all the open events, and I can do a bulk register or a bulk update through here if I want to. I can view the registered volunteers, send emails through here, create a number of different printouts. I can bulk duplicate events. You can also individually duplicate events if you go into the management screen for a particular opportunity. But there's a number of bulk actions you can take through here if you need to engage with multiple events at one time. And then obviously one of the most important screens when you're engaging with an event is managing registrations. So every event has this option to register volunteers or groups. And if we go into that menu, This will show us who is registered. In this case, this is a time slot event. So we see the time slots themselves, who's registered for those time slots. And then, of course, we can make changes through here if we want to. Up at the top of the page, if I want to add people in, I can search for them and register them. If I search for someone through here and they don't have an account, so no matches are found, I could add a profile on the right-hand side. So you can quickly create an account for someone on this screen if you need to. Again, this is from the admin perspective, so that volunteer is not going to be notified that you're doing this, but if you just want to kind of tabulate that, you can. And then on this screen, there are a few other management options. I can select registrations and remove people. I can send emails, so maybe I need to email the entire list of volunteers. You can resend the confirmation message if you'd like to, and you can also mark no-shows. So a no-show in Service is kind of what it sounds like. If you mark someone as a no-show, it's going to do two things. It takes them off of the event so they don't get credit, and then it also adds a no-show note to their profile, which is something that you can search by. If we jump over to the volunteer database, we can go into Search and Manage Volunteer Database. There's an advanced search menu. We could also have gone directly to the advanced volunteer search. But one of the options in here, towards the bottom, there's a lot of options in here, I know, but towards the bottom, we have participation options. And one of those things is to find volunteers with more than or exactly a certain number of no-shows, cancellations, or both. And you can do that between a date range if you'd like to. Okay, so stepping back to the opportunity side, just for a couple more things here, I want to point out a couple features that, again, we do have webinars on these subjects too, so I'm not going to dig too deeply into these. But one of them is impact tracking. Impact tracking is a way for you to record additional numerical metrics, that kind of explain what you've been doing with your volunteers or what they have been doing. So impact tracking is a way for you to record your impact. What these metrics are is entirely up to you. You can create whatever items you want to through here, and then you can basically select which events are engaged with these impact tracking metrics. So I have some in here like bags of trash removed, grocery bags prepared, miles driven. I also have one here that's rate your shift experience. I'm not asking, I'm not going to run reports on this per se, but more I'm just gathering information from volunteers. These metrics are not automatically applied to any events, but what happens is when you now go and create an opportunity, once you've generated one of these, or if you go and update an existing event, you'll see under advanced options the ability to associate impact tracking metrics with this event. So you can select which of these is associated, and then how you want volunteers to record that activity. And this is the same as what we saw with recording service project hours. So you can do online, on-site, or both, or of course admin only, and that is the default. Typically, I like to use this on-site because then it asks volunteers when they are signing out from their shift to give me these numbers. And I think generally that's the best time to ask for these numbers because you're not asking volunteers to remember, what did you do a week ago or what did you do yesterday? You're asking them to tell you what they did just now. So again, we have a webinar on this subject, but the idea here is that you're capturing additional metrics. What did volunteers do during their shifts? And of course, you can report on this information alongside how many volunteers were there, how many hours did they serve. You can run reports with that same kind of information alongside. Okay, and then one other feature on the opportunity management side is the sign-in console. So the sign-in console is a way for you to have volunteers track or record their attendance. The sign-in console can generally be opened on any sort of internet-connected device. We can open that through this button here. So when you're logged in as an admin, you can click on sign-in console or kiosk. There's a few dialog options here to filter the sign-in console if you want to, or if you allow walk-ins. Do you want people to use your full application or a quick reg version? But once you've opened the sign-in console, generally you want to open this in sign-in mode. If you open it in admin mode, it will leave you logged into your account. So you really shouldn't have volunteers use this version because they'll have access then to your whole database, right? So if you're having volunteers use the sign-in console, you'd want to open this in sign-in mode. But when that's open, this will just stay open as long as the device itself is on. And volunteers can essentially use this to track their attendance. So when they show up, they can search for their name. From there, they can click on that. You can have some questions asked through here. You don't have to. You can have your terms pop up if the person has not already signed them. If they've already signed them, this won't show up. And then you can also have a phone number verification. These are kind of all the different options. Just because this is my demo console, you don't have to have all these things turned on. But once someone submits that, then they can see what they're registered for. If they've already signed in, they could sign out, or they could view walk-in opportunities or sign in for a different shift. I'm going to cancel this just to show you real quick. So if we sign back in here, now it's not going to ask me those questions because I already answered them today and I have a signed copy of the terms now. But you can see I can just sign in for one of my shifts that I'm already registered for that's occurring today. And the idea here, again, is you're tracking attendance. When somebody signs in, the system will make a ding sound and say they've been signed in. The next person on the list or the next person in line could go and sign in right now, but this message will disappear in a moment. Other than that, signing out is basically the same process. So a volunteer would look up their name, and from there they can sign out from their shift. Now, you might be thinking that you have to use this, and that's not the case. You do not have to use the sign-in console to record activity. This is just a way to improve your metrics or recording. If you'd like to use the sign-in console, you can have obviously volunteers sign in when they arrive and then sign out when they leave, and that would record exactly how long they were there, and you'd get those metrics and numbers, and you can see, when are people generally arriving and all that sort of information. But you don't have to use the sign-in console. Service assumes that volunteers attended their shift for the full duration, unless something happens to disrupt that. So if a volunteer is registered for a shift and they don't sign in, they're still going to receive the default credit hours for that event. If they sign in for their shift and they don't sign out, they're still going to receive the default credit hours for that shift. But if someone signs in and out, then it will override their default number of hours and they'll receive credit for exactly how long they were there. Now, this actually is a good example of having impact tracking turned on as well. So I have that turned on for this event. So a volunteer has to fill these numbers in before they can sign out. They can add notes if they want to. But you can see it's giving me credit for how long I was there. In this case, just 1 minute, basically. Now, there are a number of ways to vary the sign-in console. You can use QR codes. You could have badges for volunteers to kind of speed up that process. You can use mobile sign-in and post QR codes for volunteers to scan when they arrive and use that to send them to mobile sign-in. So there's different ways to kind of vary this process. And if you want a deeper dive into this, we did do a webinar on this subject recently. So if you want to go and review that on our YouTube channel, that would be pretty helpful, I'm sure. Okay, so that's the sign-in console. And just to briefly point out, when you're creating an opportunity, all of them have the option of allowing mobile sign-in. So again, that would be a volunteer using their own phone to sign in for their shift, as opposed to a device that you have set up. And just one more thing I want to point out about the sign-in console. Obviously, you can open this from the admin perspective by logging in and clicking on sign-in console, but you can also get a link from our customer support team. If you click on need help, doesn't matter what you type in here, but if you click on contact us, you can say, can I please get a link to the direct sign-in console with these settings? And they'll give you that link, maybe multiple versions of the link if you have like different locations, things like that. And those are a link that you should bookmark on whatever devices you're using as sign-in consoles. It's not something you should send out to volunteers. They'll give you a nice warning about that. But that basically would help you kind of speed up the process of enabling the sign-in console or turning on the sign-in console, because you wouldn't have to be there to log in first. Okay, we've been through a lot of data so far, kind of on the opportunity side of things. There's just a couple more things that I want to point out today as we're looking at an overview of the console. So under the volunteer management heading, I just want to point out, if you go into search and manage volunteer database, This is where you engage with the existing users in your system. So in here, we can search for volunteers by name or by email address or by tag. If you leave this search field blank and click Search Volunteer Database, that will show you everyone in the system. So this will show you all the accounts in your database. And of course, you can interact with all of them at once if you'd like to. We can select all these results here. And at the top of the page here, there's bulk actions. We can send an email, send a text message if you have that enabled. You can download spreadsheets of volunteer information or create different printouts like name tags and badges and things like that. So there's a number of bulk actions that you can take through here. Obviously, sending emails is a pretty nice one, especially if you're trying to market certain events. So we could, again, search for our whole database. You don't need to try to exclude people. Service will automatically exclude failed email addresses, unsubscribed email addresses, and inactive volunteers. So those people get excluded automatically. You don't need to try to parse that out. Although, of course, you can search by those metrics if you want to. But we can go and select all of our volunteers, go to send an email, and that'll take us to a screen like this. Not to sound like a broken record, but we did do a webinar on all things email recently. So if you want to deep dive into this screen and all the options associated with sending emails, that's going to be a really good resource for you as well. But just briefly, you have a sent from address, which is separate from your reply address. If you are sending an email, you are going to get the replies. And then, of course, you have the subject and the body of the message itself. You can use a first name variable when you're sending an email in Service. So if you mouse over this info box here, you have that pound fname pound. Again, you don't need to memorize that. It's in the info box here. But this can address volunteers by name. And if you're emailing like an entire family, it's going to lay all their names out in there. The format you see here for your emails is going to be the same by default. But of course, you can edit the HTML. So if you have a particular newsletter format you already like, you can plug that in here. So just delete all of this and paste in your code. And then you can also save templates. So if you send the same or a similar email frequently, you can go and write it up, save a template, and then whenever you need to, you can just go and load that template, and pull that information back in. Okay. 2 more things about emailing, and then we'll move on to a different subject. Like I said, we have a deeper dive into this in a separate email or a separate webinar. But you can attach attachments to your emails that you send out, and then you can either choose to send the email immediately or schedule delivery. If you schedule delivery, you pick a date up to 30 days out, and then choose what time to have it sent. So if you want to send something on a holiday or on a weekend, you can choose to send that specifically then. Okay, so that's emailing. And obviously that's a pretty great tool for engaging with existing users. But just as we're looking at volunteer accounts here, of course, you can manage individual volunteer profiles. There's a lot of shortcuts here, depending on different things that you're using in your system. Like if you have awards set up in your console, you'll see an option to manage what awards this person has earned. These awards can be, generic metrics based on things like hours and numbers of volunteers and different things like that. But they can also be based on maybe just specific manually created awards. So that's also an option. All right. Other than that, if you are looking at the main menu icon for a volunteer, you have this Manage Profile option. This is sort of like the main menu for a volunteer. This has all of the options that pertain to this person. So updating info, managing registrations or hours, viewing all their attributes or file attachments or awards, right? All those kinds of things. And then down at the bottom, some managerial options to create new volunteers and duplicate contact info, assuming the identity of a volunteer within Service. This basically lets you see that person's perspective. So if we click on that here, just to show you briefly, it now says I'm logged in as Annie. So if you wanted to walk through something with a volunteer or kind of on behalf of a volunteer, or maybe they're on the phone with you or something, you can actually assume their identity to see what it looks like from their point of view. Importantly, under account management, you can revert back to your own profile. One other thing to note, you do have an option to delete accounts in Service. You can anonymize profiles and delete profiles, but you don't necessarily need to. There is not a cap to how many accounts can be in your system. There's no limit to that type of information, so don't feel like you have to go through and delete profile information, but there is an option to do so. If this person has any registrations, the system won't let you delete them straight away. You would need to go and remove all those registrations first in order to prevent kind of just removing a bunch of information incidentally. So it stops you from deleting data that would actually remove reporting information. If someone asks you to remove their personal information, what I prefer to do typically is to anonymize their profile instead. That way it removes all the person's contact information, but it retains all their registrations, so your reporting isn't effective. Okay, and one more note sort of on that idea of managing accounts and sort of cleaning up your database. We do have a webinar on that subject as well, which if you're looking to clean up your volunteer database is a helpful tool. Just kind of walks through what are the things that you can do to clean up your volunteer database, like merging profiles, anonymizing accounts, different things like that, as well as making sure you're on top of who's your list of admin and all that sort of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the volunteer side of the system. The last subject that I want to point out today is groups. And again, we have webinars on this subject that deep dive it. It's a pretty dense subject. There's a lot of different ways you can engage with groups in Service. Generally speaking, when we talk about groups here, we're talking about external organizations, corporations, clubs, churches, community groups, things like that are working with you. You can use groups internally. Maybe you want to create a set of regular volunteers or people who are approved for a certain type of task, things like that. There are other ways to identify this kind of information as well. You can use tags, you can use custom fields or checklist items, depending on what you need to do with the data. So typically groups are used more externally, although you can use them internally as well. But when we talk about working with an external group, like let's say this Boy Scout troop or a school or something like that, what you might be thinking about is, well, how do I capture, the individuals who are signing up or just the number? And you can do either with groups in Service. So let's say that Ronald from Boy Scout Troop 103 contacted me and he wants to bring 30 volunteers to an event. The questions I might ask in that scenario would be, do I care to know who the individuals are? Because if I don't care to know who the individuals are, I just want the number, then I can just use this group to do what you might call a bulk anonymous registration. I can click on register next to the group name. I can select the event that they're going to be attending. I can input the number of people they're bringing and then just click on register. Again, this is like a bulk anonymous registration. It means I don't know who these 30 people are. I'm not looking to capture their information. I just want to know the number. But if I do care to know who those volunteers are, I want them to sign my terms. I want them to have contact info or emergency contact information on hand. Then, of course, I wouldn't want to do this type of registration. So I'm going to remove this. What I would do if I need to know who the individuals are from that group depends on another question. Is this group attending an existing event in my system? They're just consuming 30 spots within an existing event that we're doing. Or am I creating a private event for this group? If I'm making a private event, I just go in and add a new opportunity like normal. I would just generally choose not to publish the event. And then under advanced options, you can also set an associated group. So we could say the Boy Scout troop is listed here. That means that any person who registers for this event will get added into that group automatically. And then the most important thing about creating something like a private event is that once you've created the event, then you can go in and you can invite people to sign up for it. So if I wanted to invite people to sign up for this event, go into manage the opportunity. In here, there's an option to send a private registration code invitation email, which is just kind of like a prefab email with an invite link. Or down here, I can also just grab this private registration code link. And from there, I can just copy this out and send it out. So this link essentially lets someone sign up for an event, even if it's not posted publicly. So that'd be the idea of a private event. Again, going back, if I want to know who the individuals in the group are, and it's not a private event, they're signing up for an existing event, then that would use what we call reservations. So reservations are essentially a way for you to set aside spots for a particular group. You make a reservation code, and then once you've made the code, you can go in and manage the reservation and save spots using this reservation code within existing upcoming events. So once that's done, then you still would send out a private invite, and essentially you're asking people to sign up for the specific spots that you've saved for them. Okay, so again, that's very brief look at groups. Those are kind of different ways to engage with groups, depending on, again, if you want to know who the individuals are, or you just want to know a bulk number, and then whether they're attending existing events or you're making a private event for them. Okay, I want to point out a couple resources available to you. We've kind of covered a lot of data today. I've alluded to the YouTube channel a couple different times. I've also briefly mentioned support, but I want to point out the resources that are available to you, and then we're going to move into a section of Q&A a little bit here. So if you do have questions, please feel free to continue writing those in. So whenever you're logged into Service on the admin side, you'll see this Need Help button at the bottom of the page. Again, you can search for a topic through here. Let's say that idea of reservations piqued your interest. We have a lot of resources on that subject, and we do a lot of work to maintain these articles, so feel free to use this. I typically prefer to pop these out. I just think they're a little bit easier to read in that kind of view. So that'll take you to a separate page, basically, where you're looking at a larger scale version of that article. But this is a good resource if you want to kind of peruse written instructions, especially if you like to have, like numbered lists of instructions. This is a good resource. Regardless what you have searched for, you can always click on Contact Us to submit a ticket to our customer support team, and they'll reach back out to you very promptly. They are very quick, and they're also very knowledgeable about the system. So please feel free to use this as you have questions as you're working in the system. The other main resource is that YouTube channel. And again, I know I've already mentioned it, but some of the webinars that we talked about, that streamlining volunteer registrations, the emails webinar, the mobile sign-in, or the sign-in console as a whole, right? Some of those things we've done recently. So feel free to kind of go back and peruse those if you have questions about some of those topics more specifically. Generally, we try to do a deep dive into a specific subject with those webinars. With the exception of today, a little bit more broader overview of the system as a whole. Okay, so we're going to switch over to a bit of Q&A here. So again, if you do have questions, please feel free to keep writing those in. So question was, does a volunteer get labeled as a no-show if they do not sign in, or only if you mark them as such? And then secondly, is there a bulk update you can use to mark all volunteers who don't sign in as a no-show? And that's a great question. I sort of answered this a bit adjacently. I mentioned that Service assumes that volunteers attended the event for the full duration unless something happens to disrupt that. So the system will never automatically mark no-shows. If you want someone to be marked as a no-show, that needs to be done manually. There's a couple different ways that you can do it. If we go into search and manage the existing opportunities, and we go into an event that's already taken place, if I go to view the registered volunteers, we can, first of all, I want to point out on time slot events, if you're looking at a page like this, it's going to show you today's date forward. So if I wanted to view the shifts from earlier in this week, I would need to change my filter date. That way I can view shifts from earlier in the week. So if I identify some volunteers who were no-shows here, I could select the individuals, and then down at the bottom of the page, I can click on Mark as No-Show. The way that I'm kind of quickly identifying no-shows in this case, you probably already noticed, they're missing this icon here for the date and time of sign-in. So this is obviously directly to do with the sign-in console. I am using the sign-in console in this case, but obviously you don't have to use the sign-in console to identify no-shows. If you just remember that somebody wasn't there, or you're looking through the list later, you can still just select whomever you want to, and then identify those people as a no-show. So if I select those names here, and then again, down at the bottom of the page, I can click on Mark as No-Show. That'll do those two actions I mentioned earlier, where it removes the volunteers from the event, and then it also adds the no-show note to their profile, which again is something you can search by. The other way to do this is in bulk. So if we back up to the opportunity dashboard, we can select all of our current open events. That's the view that we're looking at right now, but I could also search for a specific set of events. And if we go into this drop-down menu for bulk actions, one of the options in here is to mark no-shows. This isn't going to automatically mark any no-shows, but when I click on this button that corresponds to that, it's going to pull up the list of every person who did not sign in for a shift that has already occurred. So we're not seeing any shifts that are either ongoing or upcoming. We're only seeing people in this list who didn't sign in. So if I look at this list and I see a name that I recognize, like, oh, actually I remember Alejandro was there, I'm going to go ahead and sign that person in. Then it would just basically pull them off this list. And then I could take the rest of the volunteers and mark them as a no-show. Right? You can do other things through here as well, like sending emails or managing their profiles. But typically what I would do is just glance through the list, make sure that they were all not there, and then I can mark them as a no-show. And just as a brief reminder, that volunteer that I just signed in, the time of sign in this case is irrelevant because they're just receiving the default credit hours for the event. So as long as that default is the length of your event, then you're going to be good to go there. Okay. Well, we went through a lot of information today. It seems that most of the other questions were specific to maybe your organizations. So I think we're going to go ahead and cut it here for today. Thank you so much for attending. This was a lot of data. If you do have any questions or if there are specific items in your console that you need help with, please reach out to our customer support team. We'd be happy to help you with that. So thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you again in the next webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.